Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed ferns and horsetails. They're pretty magical. Anybody who doesn't believe that these things are magic really just isn't looking close enough. If you can't see the magic yet in this, get back out in nature, look around, and you're going to see so many different kinds of plants. And yet, as we study them, we're going to find these little threads that pull them together, and we're going to find these similarities. So, the next plant that we're going to look at are conifers. And if you look at the way that it's spelled, it kind of looks like conifer, which I only say because these things do produce cones. They produce pine cones. And what produces pine cones, if you've ever taken a walk through the wild, you've seen these fir trees, you've seen all kinds of different pine trees, and these are the plants that produce cones. And guess what cones have inside of them? If you just guessed seeds, you're correct. So these plants have true seeds. They're not using spores to reproduce or taproots or anything like that. You know what they're doing is they are going to produce actual seeds. If you went out in the wild and collected a pine cone that was all nice and sealed up, you'd notice it's a really sleek pine cone. And then you took it home for a couple of days. Something really interesting is going to happen. This pine cone is going to start to open up. And out of the pine cone is going to fall these little seed pods. Now, in some places, they actually collect these seeds, and humans like these because their seeds are edible, and we call them pine nuts. They're really delicious, and it's a pretty classic ingredient in a recipe called pesto that I'm going to put up today as a recipe. So, pesto, yum, delicious plant-based sauce. Also, things out in the wild, like squirrels, love these things. So you can see birds picking at pine cones, trying to get these delicious seeds. They're super high in healthy fats. And you see squirrels doing the same thing. They just wait for these pine cones that have fallen off to pick them up and eat them. Now, how does this method work for the trees themselves? Well, the trees basically grow a nice little seed pod inside the pine cone. And say this tree is on a hill or anywhere else, really. It's going to drop down from 10, 20, 30 feet. And this pine cone is going to roll because the pine cone is round. When you notice at first, these things are round. They're going to roll down the hill. They're going to roll all around. The wind is going to blow these pine cones. And then after a couple of days, after the pine cone is opened up, basically these little hatches, well, then the seeds come out. So the seeds aren't going to plant, and it's not going to have new trees that are just going to create new competition right there next to the pine trees. It's going to space it out a little bit. So pretty soon these trees are going to regrow themselves, spaced out so that the forest can spread on out. Now here's something interesting. You might know that you can tell a tree's age by the number of rings that the tree has. When they cut down the trees, they can look at the center of the tree and they can count the rings outward, and each ring represents a year. Now, why would a tree do that? Is it like get a special ring on its birthday from the gnomes? Well, it could be in many things, but we think that it's because the trees are going to expand in the summer, and then they're going to retract in the winter. Here's what that means. In the summer, when things are nice and hot, you'll notice that the wood is going to expand. It's going to get thicker. And you probably noticed this in your house, too, that things that used to fit in the winter maybe don't fit anymore in the summer. And then in the winter, that wood is going to retract. That means it's going to suck back into itself. It's going to get even tighter. And it does this to help combat the cold, because while a tree might not have the same feelings as a human and think, oh, wow, it's really cold out today, it still has to basically use its trunk to deliver water and nutrients and minerals from the ground all the way up to the rest of the tree. Now, in these trees, you notice also they're not necessarily delivering water to their leaves because they don't really have leaves. They have like long, pokey needles. And some of these needles you can also make into a tea, but some of them are toxic, so don't go out and try this at home. until you can figure out what's not toxic and what is. All right, so here's an interesting story about the rings that these trees create. When the sailors, Captain Cook and his group of sailors, came out to Hawaii, they noticed that Hawaii didn't have any trees like this. In fact, Hawaii is the furthest inhabited place away from any landmass on Earth. And so it didn't have the same kinds of plants. It only had native indigenous plants that had, the seeds had sort of possibly blown over or sailed over on the ocean, or that birds had flown all the way to Hawaii and carried the seeds in their poop and then pooped out some of the seeds. So those were the endemic species. That's the native species to Hawaii. And then, of course, the Polynesians who sailed to Hawaii, they built their boats and they came with certain types of seeds and plants that could regrow themselves. They brought bananas, they brought coconut trees, the coconut palms. Those were not indigenous to Hawaii. Those were not native to Hawaii. They brought them. And then they had them there for a couple thousand of years. And then these sailors came, Captain Cook and his group of sailors came, and they needed to repair their boats, and they couldn't repair their boats using the native Hawaiian trees. They needed a really hard wood. And the things that they were building their boats out of, these hard woods, were these trees that they found up in the cold mountains, these pine trees, these fir trees, these conifers. And so they decided that they were going to plant some conifers in Hawaii and see how they grew. Well, there was good news because they took really super duper well. They grew these up in Hawaii, and these trees that normally grew in the freezing cold mountains, they were like, wow, this is paradise. We're going to grow 3 times as fast. And they grew so fast, and they grew so tall. And the sailors were super stoked. They were like, oh, this is great. We can use these to patch our boats. But there's bad news. When they tried to use the trees to patch their boats, they realized that it wasn't a hardwood anymore. This wood that they were used to harvesting in Europe and the United Kingdom, where it had gone through these cold winters and retracted and created this tight wood that's a hard wood. Well, when it grew in Hawaii, it didn't grow hard because there were no such thing as cold winters in Hawaii. So here the wood was soft and actually absorbed water, and it didn't repel water at all. And so they tried to use it to repair their boats, and the wood that they used to repair their boats would actually take on water. So what happened? Did they cut these trees down? Well, they couldn't, because actually these trees were so good at reproducing, rolling their pine cones down the hill and producing more conifer trees all around them. They created these forests up in the mountains that nobody could cut down because they were growing way too big, way too tall, way too thick, and nobody could cut them down in the amount of time that they were reproducing themselves. And so those trees are still there to this day. So what is a conifer? If we're going to equate a conifer to a human being, it's kind of like a teenager. It definitely has a lot of things going for it, but it's not developmentally, it's not exactly like these flowering plants. There's no flower per se. There's a lot of really nice things, but no flower. What it does have is it definitely has a strong root system. It roots this tree into the earth. It has this vascular system where it can suck up minerals and water and nutrients from the earth and deliver it to the rest of the tree. It has branches, but it doesn't have flowers or buds. Despite the fact that it makes pine cones, it still doesn't make flowers. It has things that look like leaves, but the things that hold water, these little pine needles, they're not exactly like leaves. So it's not exactly like a fully developed tree yet. So if we equated this to a human being, it's more like a teenager. It's not exactly like a fully fledged human that knows how to do all these things yet. Now, one more thing that you might use that comes from these conifer trees is resin. And you have this for your cello, your viola, your violin. And this resin is just the sap from the tree. It's thick, sticky sap that sometimes has no smell to it and sometimes has this amazing smell. It smells so wonderfully green and It smells very piney, you know, because it is pine sap. And this resin can be used for a number of different things. It can hold artifacts. It can hold bugs, like just naturally this sap that can turn into amber can like hold prehistoric bugs. Sometimes when paleontologists dig up things from the past, it's a way of preserving things that are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, and they're like, oh wow, look at this bug that's been extinct for thousands of years. Well, we actually have a perfect sample trapped inside this amber, trapped inside this old sap. And for you, what you do is when you put it on your string, when you put it on your bowstring, it's a little bit sticky. And so it helps the horsehair that your bow is made from stick to that metal string of your cello and your violin. And that's what helps create that resonance, that sound. And hey, we're going to get into that next year when we study physics of what happens when I resonate things. And for now, let's show you a pine cone that we just picked up today.
So this is the pine cone that my daddy picked. And he picked this up from the ground.
Thanks, love. So you'll notice that this is a pine cone where it doesn't have any seeds anymore. When you walk around the forest, you're probably going to find something like this because it has already fallen off the tree. This is how it grew. And then opened up its hatches and all of the seeds fell out. Maybe some of them went into the ground to create more trees. And maybe some of them went into animals' mouths and got eaten. And maybe some of them sort of rotted and are now getting eaten by pill bugs, little roly-polies. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of a fun thing. These are great to toss onto a fire. They're a great fire starter. And they're a pretty fun little ornamental thing as well. You can just see like the symmetry of nature. Look at that. It's like somebody just drew a mandala. But it's a pine cone. Blow your mind. So to sum it up for conifers, if you're wondering if those Christmas trees that we get, those noble firs are conifers, yes, indeed they are. To sum them up, yes, they have a root. Yes, they have a stem. They don't exactly have proper leaves. Their leaves don't even fall off in winter because they don't have to. They're nice and hardy. In fact, they're designed for those cold temperatures, which is just perfect for them. And do they have seeds? Yes, they have seeds, but they don't have buds or flowers. So their seeds come out of that pine cone and not out of anything that flowers. They don't exactly make flowers. And we will get into more flowering plants pretty soon. That's very exciting. There's a ton of flowering plants. They're all so different, but they're all kind of similar too. All right, we will see you tomorrow.